Good afternoon. I am Carlos Limagne, a junior from Cuba studying music and business. I also serve as a worship apprentice here at Calvin, and I would like to welcome you all to the January Series 2019. We would also like to give a special welcome today to the guests at 3 of our 54 remote webcast sites: Rehoboth, New Mexico, Fremont, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois. And now, if you will, please pray with me. Sovereign God, King of creation, we thank you for all your goodness and loving kindness to us and to all whom you have made. We thank you for this day and for this time of learning. We ask that you would open our ears, our minds, and our hearts as we hear from our guest, Dr. Craig Detweiler. May this time be a blessing to us. All glory to you, loving God, now and always, through Christ and the Holy Spirit, forever and ever. Amen. And now, Laura DeHaan, Dean for Academic Administration and Professor of Psychology, will introduce our guest.
In a time when popular culture, psychology, and even the church maintain an almost constant scolding on the vanities and deficiencies of today's adolescents, Dr. Detweiler reminds us of an important fact. Our youth are created in God's own image. He writes, "They are embarking upon an ancient challenge, to know thyself, while broadcasting each awkward step along the way. We have been quick to condemn and slow to listen or see." Viewing experiences from different lenses is a tactic that Dr. Detweiler applies to many areas. Screenwriter, author, president of the Seattle School of Technology and Psychology, teacher, director, and mentor. His books explore the link between faith and popular culture, including the award-winning book, iGods, How Technology Shapes Our Spiritual and Social Lives. He has written screenplays for Disney Channel's The Duke and directed the documentary Remand, a story of a young man's search for justice in Africa. Variety named him Mentor of the Year in 2016. In his latest work, Dr. Detweiler applies his, let's face it, unusual methodology of truly looking and seeing the phenomena of the selfie, located in the context of human history. He warns that when we dismiss selfies as inherently vain, we are failing to acknowledge the struggle and the story behind them. Craig Detweiler will be available to greet the audience in the West Lobby of the Covenant Fine Arts Center following this presentation, and his books will be for sale. Calvin College is grateful to the Calvin Center for Innovation in Business for underwriting today's presentation. Please welcome Craig Detweiler.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well played. Very nice. I feel so at home. Hello, Calvin. Hello, Grand Rapids. Yeah. And hello to you watching from 54 sites around the country. How cool is that? Yeah. Did you see the smiling selfie in Auschwitz? It played into our worst fears of the clueless student with no sense of history. From her moniker as Princess Brianna to the earbud playing songs from her phone, people were outraged and offended. Her post was retweeted thousands of times with angry comments. Didn't she understand the atrocities and genocide that occurred there? After her post went viral, she dared to tweet, "I'm famous, y'all." I was asked by CNN to comment on her post. But before I joined the chorus of people condemning Brianna, I decided to look closer, to try and understand, why was she smiling? It turns out that she had long hoped to tour Auschwitz with her father. but he passed away before they made the trip. And so the smile was an acknowledgement that I made it, Dad. I finished the tour that we talked about. I miss you, and I hope you see me in this place honoring you. Can we learn to look for the story behind the selfie? A similar outrage followed this picture of young people with their backs turned to Rembrandt's Night Watch in an Amsterdam museum. How could students be so focused upon their phones rather than the masterpiece in front of them? Well, it turned out they were responding to a school assignment given by their teacher. Perhaps we would all be wise to consider what's going on behind the images we see. The theme for the January series is listen, learn, discern. This talk is about learning to look closer and to adopt God's discerning eye focused on the big picture. Of course, there are still plenty of examples of egregious selfies. For example, #hungover at the 9/11 memorial, or praising the dungeons of rap outside the Anne Frank house. This student took a selfie while his teacher was having contractions and laughed about it. Probably didn't get an A that day. How many people may miss the Mona Lisa when they turn their backs to get a selfie? USA Today asked, if you could put one invention back in the box, what would it be? What do you think topped the list? Number one, the selfie stick. More people hate the selfie stick than nuclear weapons. I don't know about you. I know I have wanted to break those selfie sticks. I was at the Grand Canyon one time. I wanted to snap that thing right over my knee. Stupid tourist about to fall off the edge. It's easy to be mad, right? And there's plenty to lament about our social media habits and our self-centeredness. But how can we get closer to love rather than hate? Here's a perfect illustration of the generation gap, right? Grandpa's just like washing his hands, and there's a young man taking a picture of himself, right, beside it. He's like, why are we doing this in the bathroom? I don't understand. Of course, I wonder how historical photos might have looked different if an earlier generation had self-facing cameras in their hands. All of us can be guilty of missing extraordinary moments passing us by, like this guy. And of course, a failure to focus may not be a new problem. T.S. Eliot, the great Anglican poet, wrote, "Distracted from distraction by distraction, filled with fancies and empty of meaning, timid apathy with no concentration, not here the darkness in this twittering world." When did he write this? 1943. I'm here this morning to merge ancient wisdom with contemporary problems, to bring the insight of Scripture to one of the most loathed and maligned forms of communication. Yes, the selfie. As a professor of theology and culture and a seminary president, I decided to study this very serious topic. The book is a sequel of sorts to my earlier work, iGods, which focused upon the 4 companies that dominate our online activities. These are the iGods of commerce and technology. It's where we spend so much of our time online, navigating through these areas. And the iGods also refers to the people behind these technopolies. My wife, when she saw this picture, she noticed they had a few things in common. They're all men. They're all Caucasian. They all struggle with face-to-face interactions. And so they've created a virtual world to their liking where we interact more with screens than with each other. So why did I need a sequel? Well, because my kids are much more interested in these companies and in these apps. And so I started studying selfies with them as my guide. Now, I have to say my kids initially thought this was very strange, and I was a very unlikely person to enter into this. My family can attest that I'm not the best selfie taker. My wife has much longer arms, and so she's much better at composition and framing. And when I first started taking selfies to do my own research, my daughter found it so humorous that she took a photo of me taking a photo. Yet our work at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology is to bring the texts of Scripture and the soul of psychology alongside contemporary culture. That is the matrix where we meet this morning and where those lines in the corner intersect: text, soul, and culture. Like Paul on Mars Hill, I want to observe the culture carefully, to get inside the artifacts before passing judgment and figuring out a biblical response. John Stott called this double listening. And so I'm not here to condemn the selfie, but to study it with you to the glory of God. Who's up for this unlikely journey? You ready? All right, let's proceed. There are glorious moments in life when it makes sense to take a selfie, like when Bruce Springsteen is pointing right in your camera. Or when you're celebrating with a few of your best friends at the Oscars. Or maybe when you're walking through space. If I was in this moment, I might pause as well to place myself properly in the universe. What biblical passage does this remind you of? This selfie snapped me back to Psalm 8. When I look at the heavens and the work of your hands and the moon and the stars that you have made, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Children of the earth, that you care for them. You have created us a little lower than the angels and crowned us with glory and honor. A selfie can be an occasion to put this scripture into practice, to pause and recognize the glory of God, the wonder of creation, and our place of honor within it. Of course, the taking of selfies isn't limited just to us, as it turns out. Now, if you think this was an accident, here's a different day. Right? Everybody in the frame, great. Max, a little to your right, okay, my left, and hold, and got it. Very nice, very nice. Selfies, I think, are great for capturing peak experiences and spiritual highs and life goals, like the Ebenezers in the Bible. There are moments that should be marked, cherished, and recorded. Some can go too far to capture an epic selfie, like this climber in Russia. Sergei's girlfriend also scales the buildings with him. That's true love, isn't it? There's a temptation to do it for the gram, right? The Instagram, to perform for the camera, which can be dangerous. That epic selfie may not be worth it. It's not always wise. You have to realize the moment that you're in. Is he trying to get a photo? Maybe he's searching for the exit on Google Maps. Keep your eye on the log. A bear and a hawk jump out of a hot air balloon. Sure, why not? This scientist took his photo within an active volcano. I don't know about you, but I'd probably keep my eye on the lava. And this passenger decided to get a photo with the terrorist hijacking the plane. It's a little foolish, gotta say. But perhaps the greatest danger that selfies pose may not be to our bodies, but rather to our souls, our psyches, and ourselves. What questions go through our mind when we post a selfie and put ourselves out there on social media? Do people like me? Do they really care? It's a daily referendum. Am I beautiful, beloved, worthy? Does anybody truly see me? It's rough to submit ourselves for public inspection and commentary. People can be cruel to each other, especially online. Thank God there wasn't social media when I was in junior high, dealing with acne, hating my hair, wondering who I was going to sit with at lunch. Such pressure is elevated for kids growing up in public today. Adults are worried about the impact of social media on our physical and mental health, but not as much as millennials themselves. They live with the burden of profile management from such an early age. Studies now are just being done. This is a public health survey in Britain that was connecting social media use to lack of sleep, elevated anxiety, depression, negative perceptions of our body image, particularly when there's a lot of use of Instagram. And what else? The self-regulation problems, right, that also arise, the loneliness that can come with adolescence. The same survey, though, also found that there's an increase in community building, a sense of emotional support, a growth in self-identity, and an expansion in self-expression. Issues of self-perception and self-worth are not new. The tension has long been with us. So how do we unlock that generative upside of self-expression and overcome anxiety and loneliness? I decided to go back to our historic roots and ask the fundamental question, why do we make images of ourselves? Where does this impulse come from? It certainly starts at a very early age. We try to place ourselves in the world, maybe with a parent or a sibling beside us. It's a lifelong struggle to figure out, who am I in relation to them? How did I get here? The answers, of course, we know, go back to Genesis. The Bible places us in this remarkable context. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. We are a reflection of a self-imaging God. Maybe we make pictures of ourselves because we were born out of this generative image-making divinity. It's not just our inclination to project our image, it's embedded in the Holy Trinity itself. We see it in this reach across the chasm from heaven to earth, finger to finger. What a powerful notion that we are made in the image of God, the IMAGO Dei. And that image is male and female, wonderfully diverse and colorful, accessible around the globe if we have eyes to see. That is the starting point of all theological anthropology. It's where Jesus' notion of neighborliness comes from. It's why we must weep over young African-American men shot down in the streets, or when refugee children are separated from their families, because we are all God's children, precious in his sight. Now, it depends upon the day. Some days we feel glorious, and other days we just feel goofy. We have moments of living into our high calling, and other times when we embarrass God and ourselves with our foolishness and our sin. Like this guy. We can all too easily obsess over ourselves rather than the source of our creation. Greco-Roman mythology offered a cautionary tale about a young man. What was his name? Narcissus. It's tough to find parallels today. And yet it's not limited to one politician or party. Remember this selfie? Where was this taken? During Nelson Mandela's funeral. Look at Michelle. She knows what's appropriate and what's not. What was Narcissus's problem? He fell in love with his own beauty. He became so self-obsessed that he failed to eat. He could only stare at his reflection. St. Catherine of Siena wrote, "If he is wise, he will be moved to love the water rather than himself. For had he not first seen himself, he could not have loved or been delighted by himself." She's saying, recognize the source of our beauty, the one who gave us the ability to see, the gift of self-reflection found in the water. Who else lost out in the Greek myth? It was not just Narcissus, but Echo as well. She loved the boy. She longed for a relationship, but was condemned to only repeat what he'd said. She couldn't break through, couldn't capture his attention. And as an echo of her former self, she withers and dies alone as well. What a double tragedy. Any parallels in our social media use today? John Milton said loneliness is the first thing which God's eye named not good. And so we were meant to be together, naked and unashamed, and yet we have a hard time. We've always found distancing devices. Relationality is found in that Holy Trinity, gathered together for all eternity, inextricably intertwined. That's the goal, that's the beauty, that's the ultimate purpose in life. Our best selfies are moments that are shared together. Joyous occasions like graduation, maybe a wedding anniversary, holidays with family, reunions with friends. Even the Pope recognizes how sacred a selfie might be. Hopefully, my goal this morning is to help us see ourselves and our selfies as God sees us, as fearfully and wonderfully made. May we see that beauty and wonder that resides within all of us. One way to do that is to place our selfies in a larger historical context. So I went back and I decided to do a brief history of self-portraiture. I decided to even go back to biblical times. So Moses had a staff, but he didn't have a camera. But thankfully, the remarkable exodus across the Red Sea was recorded via text instead of camera. That's a little joke. But we do have portraits that were commissioned in ancient Egypt to be placed atop the mummified corpse. And I'm shocked by how contemporary these images seem. They don't look so different from us. We may have friends with a similar appearance. These portraits survived across the centuries because of the dry desert air. And, they may have passed away at earlier ages, like this Egyptian boy. What details do you start to notice when you study them? Look at those eyes, those earrings, those jewels around her neck. How about this woman? Notice how she's dressed, the jewelry adorning her body. These are portraits of the wealthy, those who could afford to have their image preserved. In the ancient world, only the wealthy or the ruling class had the honor of commissioning and maybe even controlling their image. Like the queen, Nefertiti, celebrated across centuries as the standard of beauty. Where might we see her image today? Used as a registered trademark of the American Society for Plastic Surgery. Ancient representations of beauty, like Venus, still apply and even put pressure upon us. And the standards of beauty we judge ourselves against matter a lot. The whiteness of these statues can be overwhelming to those who don't resemble them. We may want to change our proportions or alter our nose or lighten our skin to look like hers. And once again, the National Capital Society of Plastic Surgeons is willing to do that. There are also apps for that. Like this, or this, or this. This does not make me happy, this makes me sad, right? I weep a little bit at what we're doing to ourselves. And ancient Greek notions of beauty are also put pressure on men. I've actually never looked like that. Certainly my stomach never has. But again, there are apps that can give you that effect. They can help you boost your muscle. They can even put tattoos on your skin so you don't have to actually go through the pain of it all. Interesting. Recent scholarship has discovered that the Greeks never actually viewed their statues as pure white marble. They were actually painted. And so they're maybe going back now and understanding the range of color and tones that were actually on those statues. And so this archer would have looked much more like this. What's the lesson for us? Catherine of Siena brings perspective. What is it you want to change? Your hair, your face, your body? Why? For God is in love with all those things, and he might weep when they are gone. What era did Catherine live within? The Middle Ages, where the self was constantly being put in check. What era took her advice that followed? The Renaissance, where artistic self-portraits flourished. Like this. Jan van Eyck. Sounds a little Dutch, perhaps. Good name for Calvin. Why did he paint himself? Maybe he liked that fancy red chaperon. It pops out against that dark background. But it's interesting. This is a portrait of a common man, not royalty, no jewelry. He isn't rich. So why paint this independent, non-commissioned self-portrait? There's clues in the picture frame itself. Jan van Eyck's signature. Art history scholars think this was a form of self-promotion, an advertisement. Hire me. Look at what I could do for you. Picture yourself here. So perhaps the first self-portrait was actually self-promotion. But look at the artistry, the delicacy, the attention to detail, the light in his eyes. It's luminous. Why was there an explosion of self-portraiture during the Renaissance? Because of a technological breakthrough. What was the big new invention? The mirror. Yeah. It was a new craft, ancient craft that was perfected anew in Murano, Italy. And that allowed painters and artists to see themselves like never before. And they loved this new invention. At age 20, Parmigiano plays with this new perspective in his self-portrait in a convex mirror, 1524. He elongates his hand to trick the viewer and to make us think the canvas is actually a mirror. That way his hand reaches out, right? It almost includes us in the frame. It mirrors the effect of selfies today, where we as viewers end up within the arms of the photographer. So close, so intimate, so playful. Consider this masterpiece by Velázquez, right? That plays with mirrors as well. As the royal court painter for the Spanish king and queen, he's asked to paint their portrait. Where do they end up in the picture? Can you see them? In the background, in the mirror. He focuses instead upon those that surround them, who are off stage. Their heir and offspring becomes front and center. And on the side, to the left, Velázquez himself, looming large. He makes sure we all know who pulled off this remarkable trick, who flipped the frame through the skillful manipulation of cutting-edge technology, the mirror. Not every artist celebrated their glory. Here, in Michelangelo's portrait of the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, have you been there? Some of you have been there? Yeah. What do we find? You see that little circle there in the middle? A mere shadow of a former self. An empty skin that art historians think is Michelangelo's self-portrait. Rather than celebrating his glory, he's celebrating kind of the brevity of life, how quickly it may fade. Caravaggio had one of the darkest personal lives of any painter in his era, and to reflect his violent nature, he painted David and Goliath. Guess which one he was? Goliath, depicting his sinful self as beheaded. St. Catherine considered such self-reflection key to a healthy spiritual life. For if you dwelt in self-knowledge alone, you would despair. And if you dwelt in knowledge of God alone, you would be tempted to presumption. One must go with the other, and thus you will reach perfection. Who's this young man? Perhaps the greatest self-portrait painter of the Renaissance or any other era. Rembrandt depicted himself across a lifetime. Here, dressed up in finery in middle age, focused more on his face rather than his finery in his latter years. What have you noticed about all the portraits that we've talked about so far? What do they have in common? A lot like those technologists, all white men. Where are the women? They were mostly absent from the academy. They weren't trained to paint. The brush was never placed in their hand, and so they couldn't depict themselves. They could only be depicted as the male painters perceived them. Except for Artemisia Gentileschi, whose father was a painter and taught his daughter the craft. She was a pioneer. And it wasn't easy navigating a man's world. Her biography is loaded with pain and abuse, but the beauty of her work endures. Like this, self-portrait as an allegory of painting. Look at her, flowing in her giftedness. She has all the tools at her disposal to create an image of herself painting, practicing her craft, the artist in her element. Radical self-representation. Circa 1600. Imagine how many other artists we missed because they didn't have the tools to express themselves. So much power and potential for self-representation resides in our smartphones. This is a democratizing tool. It gives people the ability to capture their lives, their communities, from their perspective, and to distribute that image far and wide without asking anybody for permission. And yet challenges remain. Look at this painting by Carrie James Marshall, an African-American artist. The painter's skin is black, deep, dark black. And she's filling in a color by numbers painting in the background. Her only problem, there's no black paint on her palette. Her hand is holding the bottom. She has nothing to work with. Even when she gets the brush in her hands, she may not be able to find colors that reflect and represent her. Could a deeper appreciation of selfies renew our affirmation of everyone's God-given dignity and worth? I wonder if some of the dismissiveness of selfies is rooted in discomfort with seeing unexpected people express themselves. We call Van Gogh's self-portraits brilliant, amazing, a masterpiece. They're so deeply psychological, a window into his soul. And yet when women, particularly young girls, post selfies on social media, we dismiss them as selfish or narcissistic. I see my friend Camille's selfie as psychological and complex. She teaches screenwriting at Biola, and this was posted with the hashtag New Year, New Slate, Moving Forward, a hopeful vow. I love this joyous selfie from Shiraphone and Nicole. Amazing women fighting for liberty and justice for all via their nonprofit Freely in Hope. How about this group? Gang members, Carl, Shaw, Brandon, D'Angelo, their hashtag told their story. No gang signs, just degrees. Here they were celebrating their graduation from Pepperdine together. Some of my favorite students of all time. I challenge my film students to study the masterpieces carefully, to grasp the craft of lighting, costume, makeup, composition. Can they recreate a masterpiece with the camera in their hands? That's A-level work from Alex. Brilliant use of lighting, costume, and location by Amanda. Renoir would surely be proud. And how about this? Dazzling combination of creativity and craft by KK. Why do I encourage them to take such carefully planned selfies? Thomas Merton writes, "For me, to be a saint means to be myself. Therefore, the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am and of discovering my true self." Can photography help us achieve that? We've always longed for technology that makes self-reflection and self-imaging easier, and we went to literal great lengths to snap those early photos. I love this quotation from pioneering photographer Dorothea Lange. The camera is an instrument that teaches people how to see without a camera. Can we learn how to see ourselves in God's world more clearly through a lens? Only if we slow down long enough to truly focus. A young Paul McCartney experimented with the new medium. Perhaps he was thinking, love me do, while he snapped this in Liverpool. This photographer was never famous in her lifetime. Only after she passed away did people discover that this unassuming, anonymous nanny, Vivian Meyer, quietly took over 150,000 stunning photographs. Remarkable images playing with shadow and light and herself. Cindy Sherman cast herself in a series of critiques of Hollywood's images of women. She wonders why women always have to be sexualized, endangered, and helpless. Even the pan in here seems to be threatening her, about to stab her. Robert Mapplethorpe portrayed himself as a young punk, but then, as he confronted an early death, he altered the selfie, oh so dramatically. In the book, I challenge readers to explore their shadow sides, to present more than just the sunny side of life, idealized images. Can we make room to express the dark nights of our soul in social media spaces? Perhaps we'd all appreciate more honest selfies. I believe a healthy selfie recognizes the pain and the beauty of what's happening. So how might we respond? How does this apply to you and me today? Researchers at BYU asked people how and why they posted selfies on social media. The survey found that we tend to take selfies for 3 distinct reasons: to communicate with others, to self-promote, or to document our lives. We may blur our habits on occasion, but thinking about your own picture taking, do you land in one of these categories? How many folks would say, yeah, I like social media for communication? Is that the kind of thing you do? Yeah. How many folks would say, I like to document my life. I like to sort of take photographs of where I've been along the way and to say, yeah, I want to remember this. Anybody willing to admit I'm a shameless self-promoter? There you go. So she must truly be a self-promoter, right? She's like, yes, that's me, right here. I was talking with Young Life staff from the area beforehand, and they said, I wonder if we tried to reverse that, and we decided to just promote other people via social media. What would that look like? Who do you think's the biggest self-publicist in the world right now? Certainly the most famous, perhaps. Kim Kardashian West. Anybody ever heard of her? One of you, two of you, yeah, a couple of you. She certainly puts the time and the energy into it. It's a lot of work. And researchers found that self-publicists don't necessarily want to hear back from people. They're actually not interested in two-way communication, just how big their audience and reach is. And of course, many have parlayed such self-promotion into a job. Social media influencer. Do we have any here today? If so, I'd like you to tweet about this event. So suddenly I have like 100 more followers online. Who's learned from and maybe even exceeded Kim? Her younger stepsister, Kendall Jenner. She topped Kim with this post. 3.2 million likes on Instagram. And Kendall influenced so many others. Like this, or this, or this, or this. And my favorite. This is Kirby Jenner. He claims to be her long-lost brother, and he photoshops himself into all of her posts on his. So you follow Kirby, you'll love his stuff. For young women following these social media influencers, it's tough to compete with supermodels. There is so much Insta pressure to present a perfect self. You're measured by fame and by followers, by literal numbers. And plenty are trying to craft the most aesthetically perfect Instas. Donna Freitas wonders whether such pressure to appear happy online is making us even more depressed. When we measure ourselves against filtered images, comparisons can be overwhelming. Now, there are legitimate expressions of joy that put a smile on our face, like Taylor Swift and her cat. And there is content and satisfied, and then there is deliriously happy. And we see so much of this on Instagram. To what degree did Princess Brianna feel pressure to smile, even when remembering her deceased father? Social media influencer Asena O'Neill burned out on her airbrushed images, and she decided to rewrite all of her posts with honest captions like this. Can you see? I had acne here. It's a lot of makeup. I was smiling because I thought I looked good, but happiness based on aesthetics will suffocate your potential here on earth. Where can teens be more honest or at least less than perfect? Snapchat, every parent's worst nightmare. That's why the teens are congregating there, because the parents aren't there. Snapchat arrived as a self-correcting app, a place for teenagers to let their hair down, where the awkward photos disappeared rather than following you around forever. The lines between Snapchat and Instagram have blurred since they continue to steal coding ideas from each other. But Snapchat strikes me as a great medium for communicators. It offered a way to say, this is what I'm feeling and experiencing right now, and invited a fast and funny visual response. Snapchat is a place to be playful and to try on personas, to swap faces at the British Museum, or to talk about the racial profiling you're about to endure. Just being honest. It's a place even for supermodels to post less than perfect photos of itchy red spots. You might find a makeup and hair artist like this who shows you what they look like in a more casual way. I love this frustrated mom who decided to mock the idealized images of J-Lo. Winning. Can social media become a place of transparency rather than projection? Can it be a venue to be vulnerable, to engage in true confessions? St. Augustine founded a new form of literature. Centuries of spiritual autobiographies followed, whether Catholic or Protestant. The Puritans kept daily diaries as a form of discipleship, assessing one's spiritual well-being in written form. With additional reflection, could selfies become a form of spiritual diary, taking stock of where we are in relationship with God? Perhaps this makes the most sense for that third group, the autobiographers. Those who take selfies as a form of autobiography may snap a photo to record sacred moments, like a profound mountaintop experience, or a close encounter with a kangaroo, or a cuddly sleeping koala. Come on. Selfies and social media are becoming the record of our sojourn on earth, like what I had for lunch today. What about all these photos of food? Could this be a kind of prayer? Pausing to note the beauty and the bounty set before us. Is this a millennial way to honor God and express gratitude for what we are about to receive? The millennials are saying no. But it could be. Aren't the best Instagram photos comparable to Ann Voskamp's challenge to note 1,000 gifts from God? Very similar. To appreciate the artistry of the chef, but also the splendor and biodiversity of God's creation. So where are selfies headed? How should we think about these alterations to our appearance? This virtual, or more likely altered reality. It's fascinating when I see people being playful with their self-image, trying on flowers and hats to create what I would call an aspirational selfie. But some modifications can feel like a bit too much, like this student's selfie. This is one of the only self-portraits I ever took, and it was aspirational. No, this isn't me wishing that my hair was black. It actually used to be. But this picture was taken before I knew how to play guitar. As a new member of the Young Life staff, on my fundraising Christmas card, I pictured myself as the guitar player I hoped to be. And within 6 months, I was playing songs at our Young Life meeting. Not well, but well enough. So what do we do with this aspirational side? What's a biblical response to AR and VR and all the new kinds of idealized projections arising? I don't want to judge my student too quickly. I want to figure out how to love her and to understand why this is her favorite selfie. I thought about this for a while. All of these projections of our hopeful, beautiful selves seem connected to a major moment in the life of Jesus that is easily overlooked in Protestant circles. It's the key event between his baptism and his crucifixion. What is that? In the Gospel of Luke, the transfiguration occurs 8 days after Jesus' challenge to the disciples to deny themselves, to take up their cross and follow him. This event is the opposite of renunciation. It is affirmation. It is fireworks. It is the big reveal. The transfiguration offers a foretaste of glory divine. It showed us how Jesus would be lifted up and transformed, how he will shine for eternity. And that longing for eternity is embedded within all of us. And it shows up in unexpected ways on social media if we have eyes to see it. When we seek to be augmented, we are longing to be transfigured, to reach resurrection and ultimate beauty. The transfiguration was a mountaintop experience that the disciples struggled to translate back into their daily lives. They could imagine a bright future, but still struggle to live into Jesus' transformative teaching. But in the transfiguration, we see so clearly that he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. The transfiguration links Genesis to Revelation, the creation of the world to the coming glory. It brings heaven down to earth. The prophets, Moses and Elijah, are joined with eternity to come. The old meets new in a divine kiss. What's the Greek word for image in the Bible? Icon. Jesus is the icon of the invisible God. And in this icon from Sinai, we see both sides of Jesus' life and experience. Hold up your right hand, if you will. Hold up your right hand. Cover half of his face. First the right side. Now move it to the left. Notice the difference? Right? What did we see? On the left side, Jesus looks young, unburdened, eternal, and divine. On the right side, we see the weight of humanity's sin, the burden he carries for us, the Savior who suffers and dies. This image of Jesus embodies the tension we live within. As fully man, he experiences pain, suffering, and crucifixion, things we rarely talk about on social media, how we are broken and bruised. And yet, we still express our hopes and dreams in glory, the polished side of ourselves, a little lower than angels. We are made in the image of God. Could our selfie making be an inherently spiritual search for God via God's image, us? Can we pause to think about the intentions of the person posting that selfie? Maybe they need to know they are seen and noticed and affirmed as a child of God. May we all aspire to be our best selfie on social media, to see ourselves and each other as God sees us. Next time you hold up that camera, imagine that Jesus is behind it, smiling at you, his beloved daughter, his precious son, in whom he is well pleased. Thank you for taking a closer look at selfies with me. I look forward to continuing the conversation on Twitter or Instagram, or maybe even face-to-face. Thank you.
That's great, Craig. I just want to take a couple photos before we begin, but I will pass. I'll start with a question here from a student. How does your background in psychology influence the way you think about technology? Actually,
I'd say, I'm trained, I was an English major as an undergrad. I have a background in theology, and I don't know psychology as well. In coming to the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, that was my weaker area. I wanted to grow in that area. And even in writing this book, I felt underprepared in that psychological chapter. So I feel like I'm still learning a whole lot more in that arena.
Has internet and social media proven to be an effective method of evangelism? I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about technology being brought into worship spaces.
Those are two huge questions. It's interesting. I have a friend who, believe it or not, buys Facebook ads for Jesus and targets them in countries like Pakistan, places where it's hard to sort of cross borders. It's interesting, social media can cross borders that might be closed. It's fascinating. Is it effective? I don't know. I mean, the master plan of evangelism was person to person. I believe that social media is a person-to-person exchange, right? It's an extension of who we are as people. Yeah. So it's loaded with possibilities. For churches, churches have always been, I think, at the forefront of technology. We just haven't thought about it that way, right? So Gothic cathedrals, that was cutting-edge technology. Stained glass was new technology. Organs were new technology. Bells was an innovation. Clocks that told you when to pray and when to work, monks invented those to order their day. So I'm not afraid of technology. We've always figured out how to turn it into a tool that we use rather than something that uses us.
Students wondering if you can elaborate on personal and family experiences that you've had that informs your perspective on social media and selfies.
Well, I think my kids are great teachers, and I try to be a good student of them and a good student of students as well. I acknowledge the generation gap that's part of this maybe digital divide between digital natives and digital nomads. And I think we would all be served by learning and listening from each other. And I think it's okay if we let the next generation be the experts and teach us why they like this and what it means to them, and that we adopt a learning and listening posture.
And sort of following up on that in line and staying with the whole family issue, what's your advice to parents on giving their children phones or social media accounts?
That's a huge question as well. So we started by giving our kids dumb phones, not smartphones. And I think that was a wise thing, just to sort of see how they did with the device in their hands and whether they texted too much or got distracted by it. But they seemed to handle that well. And so then we felt comfortable giving them more power and more ability, that they understood what this tool was. They understood how to turn it off. They understood how to not make it the center of their life. I think to teach people how to use tools responsibly is very important. What age that is, I don't know if that's 10, 12, 14, probably somewhere in there at an age when they're making a lot of, just starting to make more decisions on who they want to be.
Well, and following up on that, are there boundaries that you put on technology for yourself?
It's interesting. My wife, there was a year or two where she would turn the internet off at an appointed hour in our house. And that was one way to sort of make sure that people could be present for each other. I think it's also important, there's a lot of ties to sleep studies and how if you've been on the internet too much before, you might have a hard time sleeping. So even the need to do something else for 30 minutes or an hour to gear down. So yeah, the need to self-regulate and take charge of that device, I think is very important. I also love the idea of Sabbath rest. I had a student who said the time he feels most free is when he's playing volleyball, and he realized it was the only time he wasn't connected to social media. Another student said she loved swimming because she couldn't take the phone with her. It was time away. There were no electronic inputs. So we are starting to get in touch, I think, with the need to do more and more of that.
Students wondering about how do you push back against the constant need to improve and upgrade to the latest piece of technology when phones and computers are being upgraded every year?
It's a strange chase, isn't it? It's hard to ever feel like you're kept up. I think the technology industry wants you to be in a panic and wants you to feel like you never have enough and that you must upgrade to the new device. But there's an interesting article, if you look it up in the New York Times, it says Steve Jobs was a low-tech parent. It turns out he didn't give his own kids iPads. He's telling you, you need your kids to have an iPad, but my kids don't need an iPad. So, depending on what kind of creativity you want to encourage in your household or even in your own life, you may not need all those upgrades that everybody insists that you have to have.
Someone's wondering if you can, there's a lot of negative content on, and divisive content on social media, and they're wondering if there's anything that you can do to lower the amount of negativity in the media and on social media.
That's probably a different speaker who will address that topic in days to come. I mean, civility and discourse. We're really only, about 20 years into this problem of how to deal with people in a digital space. So we've concentrated on how to love people face to face, but we don't know how to love people online. So the notion of digital discipleship is a new concept. And we in our churches and Sunday schools and youth groups, we need to start to figure that out together. What does it mean to love someone via social media? How do I, instead of thinking first about my own status, how do I figure out how to care for others and ask more how you are doing rather than always broadcasting what I'm doing?
I've got a couple Twitter tweets coming in about...
Could be trouble, unless it's that social media influencer.
I know, it's right here, right on my screen in front of me. Wondering a little bit about how employers are using social media to research employees. And this one question asks, how do we be more honest about ourselves online when that's the first place employers look?
That's a great question. It's a really tough thing. I came to faith as a freshman in college, and I wanted to put distance between my old life. And I could do that in that time and space. But now our digital footprint follows us. And so this is something I think we need to think through very carefully. You think about, the Apostle Paul gave up his old name and his old persona as Saul. Do we have an equivalent in the social media universe, right? Do we have the ability to say, well, no, that was Saul online, and I'm going to be Paul as I move forward. Tough situation, young people. that we as adults didn't face. So we'll have to kind of try to help you figure that out.
Maybe your next book.
I'm too old for another book. Actually, I'm just kidding. I'm going to write another. I'll write another. Maybe
Craig?
you could tell me what I should write about next.
Dr. Detweiler will be available in the lobby to sign books and for additional questions after this. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.